Lightfall, The Light Within, a short story by Light, and narrated by Light. Light returned beneath a sky that seemed older than memory. Beyond the plains of Lordaeron, the night had spread itself wide and solemn, with stars scattered like silent witnesses across the dark. Clouds drifted over them, slow and heavy, as if even the heavens had grown weary of war. The wind moved gently through the grass, brushing the slopes around the Lightfall Lands with a softness that did not belong to a world so often broken. For a while, Light did not move. He stood before his home, the manor rising in shadows before him, its towers and timbered walls carved against the night. Behind it, another tower kept watch from the hill, its windows glowing faintly with the warmth of lamps kept alive in his absence. The place was smaller than citadels he had known, humbler than halls of kings, quieter than the bastions of the crusade, and yet, as he looked upon it, his heart faltered. Home. This word struck him with unexpected force. He had crossed battlefields where the dead did not rest. He had knelt in sanctums where the light sank like living fire. He had marched beneath banners, sworn oaths before commanders, buried champions beneath snow, ash, and stone. He had seen cities burn and realms beyond death open their gates. He had felt the voice of the Naru speak truths so vast for mortal hearts to carry without trembling. But after a month away, after roads without comfort and nights without sleep, after prayers that returned only silence, this keep nearly broke him. Not because it was grand, because it had waited. The Lightfall Lands had once been poisoned ground. There had been a time when the soil itself remembered plague, when brute and strain carried the sorrow of Lordaeron's fall. Scenario Circle had labored here, with patient hands calling life back from places that had forgotten spring. The Argent Crusade had stood beside them, urging the work of healing against all that would profane it. Together, they had coaxed green from ruin. They had asked nothing of the land, except that it live again. And it had. Grass now grew where corruption had festered. Trees rose where silence had once been thick with death. Birds nested in branches above earth that had once known only rot. The Lightfall Lands were not untouched by grief. Nothing in Lordaeron was. They were proof that grief need not have the final word. Light had chosen this place for that reason. He thought now. This place had chosen him. He took a deep breath. His armor felt heavier than it had at the beginning of the road. The sword across his back, once a familiar weight, now pressed against him like the memory of every oath he feared he had failed to keep. The blue of his cloak stirred behind him. Its color had followed him across years of service, across battlefields and holy halls, across the snows of Northrend and the long shadows of the Fourth War. Blue and gold, Lordaeron and Stormwind, memory and duty. He had been born after the Second War into a world that already knew what it meant to rebuild from ruin. He had been too young to understand the full shape of the wounds left behind, but old enough to inherit them. By the time the Third War came, childhood had become a luxury history could no longer afford. He had not been a champion then. He had not been a Highlord. He had been a young Paladin in training, his hands shaking as he learned to bind wounds, steady breath, and speak comfort to those who no longer believed comfort had meaning. When the wounded were sent south to Stormwind, he had followed as a healer, carrying water, clothes, prayers, and whatever courage a young Paladin could gather. He remembered soldiers calling for mothers, wives, sons, daughters, gods. He remembered whispering the words of the light over men who were already beyond saving, because sometimes a prayer was not meant to heal the body, but to keep the soul from living alone. That had been his first lesson. The light did not always spare. Sometimes it accompanied. Years later, in Northrend, he had learned the second lesson. The cold did not care for righteousness. The Northrend campaign had hardened him in ways no chapel ever could. There, beneath skies pale as bone, mid ice and death, an endless war against the horde and the scourge, he saw faith tested not by doubt, but by exhaustion. Women and men who believed with all their hearts still bled. The righteous still froze. The brave still screamed in the dark. And yet they stood. Not because victory was certain, because someone beside them needed them to stand. In the Fourth War, when he bore the mantle of Highlord, Light had learned the third lesson. Command is not glory. It is loneliness wearing armor. Every order carries the ghost of those who may not return. Every strategy is written in lives. Every victory demands that someone remember the coast after the banners are folded away. He had led, and he had been praised. He had prevailed, and had been called steadfast. But praise could not sit with him in his quiet hours. It could not answer the questions that came when the war room emptied and the candles burned low. What is the light when it does not save everyone? What is faith when the faithful still suffer? What is victory when the heart remains unconsoled? The Shadowlands had given those questions teeth. It was there, in realms no living man should tread, that Light had found a beloved one. Death, once distant, despite all he had seen, became intimate. It no longer wore the face of the battlefield, or a plague, or a report delivered by a messenger. It wore a face he loved. That grief had opened a door in him. Or perhaps it had broken one. The Shadowlands he had encountered a Naru whose radiance was unlike the light he had known. Not softer, not stronger, but deeper. Its glow did not merely shine, it seemed to remember every soul that had ever reached towards hope. From it, Light learned secrets of the light that no sermon had ever named. He learned that the light was not only power, nor judgment, nor blessing, nor weapon, nor shield. It was older than victory, more intimate than prayer, more demanding than obedience. And then the Naru spoke one word in his mind: Lightfall. Not as a place, not as an order, not as a spell, but as the true way of being of the light. Since that day, Light had searched. He searched in scripture, he searched in relics, he searched in old ruins and sanctified vaults, in records of the Silver Hand, in testimonies of priests, paladins, unbroken prophets whose minds had brushed too near eternity. He searched in the history of Lordaeron, the ruins of the kingdoms of men, in the memories of those who had survived what no one should have had to survive. A month ago, he left home again. This time, he had gone in search of answers that could not entrust to others. The war within had shaken him more deeply than he wished to confess. Beneath the earth, beneath old certainties, beneath the proud words of champions, he had seen how easily the dark could whisper, not from the sky above, but from within a person itself. The war within had not ended with the silence of weapons. It had followed him. He had entered his prayers. He had stood beside him in the dark and asked why the light had not answered. Now he had returned with no triumph, no relic, no revelation, only weariness, only questions, only the ache of having searched everywhere except the one place he feared most to look. Light lured his gaze from the stars. Banners of the Alliance hung to either side, blue and gold beneath the torchlight. Lions kept watch over the threshold, proud and unwavering. The flames beside them burned steady, and the blue glass above the door glowed with a calm that seemed almost merciful. For a moment, Light remained there, a pilgrim at the entrance of his own home. Then he crossed the threshold. The door closed behind him with a sound that settled through the hall like the ceiling of a chapter. Warmth embraced him. Wood, stone, candle smoke, old books, polished metal, faint trace of food and hard fire, all the quiet fragrances of a lived-in place gathered around him. Yet the keep did not feel lively tonight. It felt expectant, as if it knew he had returned empty-handed, as if it had been waiting for the answer, but the man who had failed to find it had returned. Before him rose the main staircase, broad and shadowed. Its blue runner climbed over the upper hall. The room around it was dark, but not abandoned. Candles burned on either side, their flames small and patient. Curtains hung in faded grandeur. Cobwebs, barely visible in the corners, trembled in the draught. Light looked up. He had walked grand stairs. He had climbed the steps of fortresses, temples, towers, and thrones. But this staircase carried another weight. It held no soldiers, no supplicants, no commanders awaiting report. Only memory. He began to climb. Each step teared another fragment of the road behind him. A chapel beneath a dead sky. A Naru's voice, ringing without sound. A relative's hand slipping from his grasp. Snow in Northrend. The cries of the wounded in Stormwind. the bells of Lordaeron bringing the return of its prince. He reached the top and paused before the way opened into the heart of the manor. The dining hall awaited beyond. When light entered, the space seemed almost too warm after the cold of his thoughts. Long tables filled the chamber, heavy with food left prepared in honor of his return. Roasted meats, fruit, bread, fish, candles, mugs and plates enough for a gathering. Steam curled upward in pale ribbons from dishes still warm. Chairs lined the table in orderly rows, each one a promise of fellowship, each empty place a quiet reminder that community could exist even when no one was present. He stood at the threshold and did not enter at once. This room had always been the core of the keep, not the chapel, though he revered it, not the war room, though he depended on it, not the libraries, though he loved them. The dining hall. Here, people came without armor. Here, laughter had risen to the high ceiling, had struck the beams above and returned sweeter for having climbed. Here, stories had been told badly and retold worse. Here, arguments had dissolved into bread and wine. Here, the weary had eaten. Here, the lonely had sat beside someone else and discovered that loneliness too could be interrupted. Light lifts his eyes. The ceiling rose far above him, high and timbered, with banners hanging beneath it like old oaths. The beams stretched upward into warmth and shadow. Candles and torches cascaded over stone and wood. The room felt both humble and vast. A hall built not to impress, but to hold. That perhaps was why it wounded him. He had spent a month searching for the secrets of Lightfall, and here before him was a room built around the simplest act of shared life. To gather, to eat, to speak, to listen, to belong. He almost laughed, but the sound would not come. Instead, he crossed the dining hall in silence. At the far right, the tower stair waited. Its opposite stood across the hall, facing it like a twin in vigil. Light turned upwards the right-hand tower and began to ascend. The stairs wound upward through wood and stone, narrow after the breadth of the hall. Lamps flickered along the walls. Shadows leaned across the railing. Above and below, the hold seemed to breathe with him. He pressed shelves crowded with books, desks set beneath windows, chairs drawn close to candles, and scrolls rolled beside ink pots. The tower was filled with study. Here, knowledge had not been hoarded in cold silence, but made habitable. Here were places to sit, to argue, to write, to doubt, to change one's mind. There were books that had known many hands. There were notes left unfinished. There were maps of lands scarred by war and lands still there to bloom. Light slowed. For years, he had trusted study because study had shaped to longing. A question written down seemed less like madness. A doctrine traced through history seemed less like desperation. A prophecy compared with another prophecy could almost convince a grieving man that meaning was something to be found if only he searched long enough. But the shelves had not given him Lightfall. Nor had the consuls, nor had the relics, nor had the road. He had mistaken searching for understanding. That thought came so suddenly that he stopped upon the stair. He gripped the rail. The wood was warm beneath his palm. No, not yet. He was too tired to judge himself fairly, too close to despair to distinguish humility from surrender. The mind, when wounded, could turn even truth into a blade. He continued upward. As was his custom, light went first to the chapel. The door stood partly open. Beyond it, candles burned in quiet rows, their flames gathering around the altar in soft gold. The chapel was not large, but it possessed a stillness that made size irrelevant. Benches lined from the door. Blue carpets marked the path. Windows glowed amber at the walls. At the far end, the altar waited, with an open book, a candle, and two shallow basins of pale luminous water. Light entered slowly. At once, his breathing changed. Not because the chapel erased his sorrow. It did not. True sanctuaries do not deny pain. They make room for it before the presence of what pain cannot destroy. He approached the altar and knelt. For a time, he said nothing. Words had become difficult during the journey. At first, he had prayed with purpose, then with urgency, then with frustration, then with shame. By the final days, prayer had thinned into silence, and silence into a kind of waiting he could not name. Now, kneeling before the altar in his own chapel, light bowed his head. "I have returned," he whispered. The candles answered only by burning. "I found no answer." The admission seemed to leave him smaller. I looked where I knew to look. I followed every sign I could read. I called upon memory, scripture, oath, and wound. I remembered what the narrated told me. I carried the name Lightfall as if it were a key, but no door opened for me. He closed his eyes. In the Shadowlands, when death took the face of my beloved daughter, I believed grief had led me to revelation. I believed the light had not abandoned me. I believed the word I had been given was mercy. His voice trembled. But what mercy gives a starving man the name of bread and not bread itself? The question struck the chapel and returned to him in silence. He remained kneeling until his legs ached. Then slowly he rose. Across from the chapel, at the far end of the keep's upper reach, lay the war room. Light turned towards it. The journey from the altar to war room had always felt deliberate. Prayer and planning faced one another in the architecture of the keep, as if the manor itself understood what leaders often forgot. That action without contemplation becomes pride, and contemplation without action becomes escape. He crossed the passage and entered. War room opened before him in warm light. Long tables stretched along both sides, their surfaces set with maps, books, candles, mugs, and the remnants of council. Chairs stood ready for those who would gather when danger came, or when hope required organization. Shelves lined the walls, banners hung above them, blue cloth marked with a silver hand. At the far end, raised slightly above the rest, stood the leaders' tables, and there, upon its stand, lay the codex of Lightfall. Even from across, Light could see its glow. It was not fierce at first. It did not blaze like a weapon or strike the eye like the flash of holy judgment. It shone with contained radiance, as though dawn itself had been pressed between pages and taught patience. Light walked towards it. His boots sounded softly on the floor. Every step felt heavier than the last. The codex existed since the beginning, to be fair. Light decided to change its name to Codex of Lightfall after Shadowlands. Its visible pages contain histories, names, vows, accounts of service, reflections on the light, records of those who had come seeking purpose and been staying to build belonging. It was more than a book. It was a memory that could be touched. But Light had long suspected there was more within it. Not because of any inscription, not because of prophecy, because whenever he stood near it, particularly after returning from the Shadowlands, some part of him felt watched by mercy. He reached the stand. The book lay open, vast and radiant. Lines of script crossed the pages in patterns, half legible, half glowing. Gold gathered along the edges. Light spilled softly across the wood, across the nearby shelves, across the blue of his cloak and the metal of his armor. For a long moment, he did not touch it. He feared, absurdly, that nothing would happen. Worse, he feared that something would. At last, Light placed his hand upon the page. The glow did not change. Not at first. Instead, memory opened. He saw the road of the past month. Rain, dust, closed doors, old ruins, indifferent libraries, priests with kind eyes, and no answer. He heard himself asking the same question in different forms, always hoping that the next phrasing would awaken the truth. What is Lightfall? Where is it hidden? How is it reached? What did the narrow mean? Then, deeper memories rose. The Shadowlands, the beloved one, the narrow's radiance, that single word spoken like a bell inside his soul. Lightfall. Then the war within. Light stayed far too long in the Shadowlands, because he could not leave his beloved one. Only when he learned to let it go, only when he started to understand grief, he returned to the world of the living, found the darkness beneath the world, the uncertainty, the uneasy knowledge that Victor had not cleansed the wound, the sense that the void did not merely wait in distant stars or ancient prisons, but listen from within the places mortals refused to search. Light's hand tightened on the page. The room seemed to dim. He saw again the faces of those he had failed to save. The wounded in Stormwind, the frozen dead in Northrend, the soldiers of the Fourth War, his beloved Balta, who died in Mardenhold Keep. Every hand he had held, a thought rose in him, terribly in its simplicity. What if I have spent my life searching something I do not understand? His breath caught. The codex blurred before him. He tried to pray, but the words broke apart. What if the Naru gave me the answer and I was too blind to receive it? The despair that followed was not loud, It did not strike like thunder. It settled upon him like deep water. Light poured over the Codex. For the first time in many years, the Highlord, the veteran, the healer, the son of Lordaeron, the seeker of Lightfall, did not know how to stand. And in that collapse, something strange happened. He stopped, reaching outward. There were no ruins left to search in that moment, no scriptures to compare, no distant sanctums, no relic, no priest, no naru, no battlefield, no title, no rank, no history. Only light himself. Only the ache within him. Only the darkness he had carried home. His mind returned, unbidden, to the name of the age. The war within. He had taught it a description of events, of enemies, beneath the war, within the coureway of Azeroth, of old powers, stirring in hidden places, of the world soul, opening where no one had looked deeply enough. But perhaps it was more than that. Perhaps they had called it the war within for a reason. Perhaps the darkness of the void was not the only force to be resisted beyond the walls of the cell, but also a whisper to be faced within the chambers of one's own fear. Perhaps no champion could understand the light while refusing to look at the darkness that makes one afraid of needing it. Light closed his eyes. He did not banish the despair. He turned towards it. There, within himself, he saw not one darkness, but many. Fear that his faith was insufficient, anger that the light had allowed suffering, shame that he still grieved, pride that had disguised itself as duty, loneliness that no title could soothe, and beneath them all, a child in the corridors of Stormwind, holding a blooded cloth and whispering prayers during the Third War over the dying, because he did not know what else love could do. Light spread, broke, not with defeat, with recognition. He had been looking for Lightfall as though it were a flame beyond the horizon. But what if the horizon had been within him all along? The Codex answered. A radiance surged from the pages. Light recoiled, startled, stumbling back from the stand as gold flooded the war room. The glow rose high enough to cast the shelves into blazing silhouettes. Candles bent in the force of it. Banners shimmered as if stirred by a wind no window had ever admitted. The pages turned, not by hand. Slowly, solemnly, and with the weight of something long concealed and long awaited, the Codex opened beyond its known writings. Pages that had not existed a moment before unfolded from within the spine, their edges burning with soft lightness. Lines of hidden script emerged, first faint as breath upon glass, then bright as dawn breaking through storm clouds. Light stood motionless. The hidden section had opened, not to command, not to answer pride, not to reward conquest, not to meet a man who had finally ceased fleeing from the darkness within himself. He stepped forward again, slowly this time, and read. At first, the words were not words. They were warmth. They passed through his eyes and into his memory, and from memory into understanding. They seemed written not merely upon the page, but upon every wound he had carried without knowing it had become part of his prayer. Then the script steadied, and the codex of Lightfall revealed its secrets, like an Aru, a voice within Lightfall. You have searched for the light as though it were lost. Light swallowed. The letters glowed beneath his gaze. But the light was not hidden from you because it was far away. It was hidden because you had not yet turned towards the place where it had been entrusted. The chamber was silent except for the living hum of the codex and faint occasional crackling from the fireplace. The purest use of the light does not begin in command. It does not begin in victory. It does not begin in the power to heal, to strike, to shield, or to judge. These are works of the light, but they are not its source within the person's soul. Light leaned closer. The light within a person is first known not when that person shines, but when that person becomes aware that they are able to shine. He felt the sentence pass through him like sunrise through an open door. Many spend their lives pursuing the light as though it dwells only beyond them, in relics, in heavens, in orders, in temples, in voices greater than their own. They are not wrong to seek. The light does not dwell beyond. It speaks in stars, in Naru, in blessing, in the hand of healers, in the courage of the just, and in the mercy that refuses to die. But the light beyond is not meant to make the soul empty of itself. It is meant to awaken what has been there within one from the first place. Light's hands trembled, and the hidden page turned. To understand the truth of the light, one must learn that the light is not only pushed outward, it is nourished inward. Not possessed, not claimed, nourished. The word held him, nourished. Not conquered, not commanded, not mastered, not proven. Nourished. Like land recovered from the plague. Like green returning to Lordaeron. Like a candle protected from the wind. Like a grieving heart that continues somehow to beat. The codex continued. Each person carries a small dawn. In some, it is buried beneath grief. In some, beneath anger. In some, beneath fear, pain, exhaustion, or wounds inherited from wars that did not begin. In some, it has never been named. In some, it has been mistaken for weakness, because tenderness is often the first thing tyrants teach the world to despise. Yet, the dawn remains. Light's vision blurred. He thought of the wounded in Stormwind. Had that been it? The small dawn? Not the power to save every life, but the refusal to let the dying be abandoned? Had the light been present, not only in the miracle that restored health and breath, but in the hand that stayed until breath ended? Page brightened, as if in answer. To find the light within is not to discover that one is sufficient alone. It is to discover that one has been given something that becomes truer when shared. The light that is hoarded becomes pride. The light that is performed becomes vanity. The light that is weaponized without meaning becomes judgment, empty of mercy. But the light that is nourished within and given freely becomes a beacon. Light closed his eyes. A beacon. The word did not feel abstract. It felt like a tower window burning through night, like banners by a door, like candles in a chapel, like a dining hall prepared for companions who had not yet arrived, like a war room where plans were made not for glory, but for protection. He opened his eyes and decided to read for himself. This is the first movement of Lightfall. The lines shown. Awakening. A soul becomes aware of the light it carries, not as ownership, but as responsibility, not as superiority, but as invitation, not as escape from darkness, but as a courage to face darkness without letting it become Lord of the heart. The next page turned on its own, but nonetheless, Light continued to read. This is the second movement of Lightfall. Appear in the line. Nourishment. The light within must be tended by truth, by humility, by prayer, by rest, by the 5 virtues. Be it as you may, but it has to be by memory rightly held, by grief allowed to speak without being enthroned, by companionship, by service, by beauty, by laughter, by meals shared at long tables after long roads, by silence in chapels, by study, by confession, by the willingness to be healed, even after years spent healing others. Light looked away from the page. The manor around him seemed suddenly transformed, though nothing had changed. The dining hall below, with its long tables and rising warmth, the towers of study full of books and candles, the chapel facing the war room, the leader's tables, the codex itself. It had all been a map, not of the keep, but of Lightfall. He returned to the text. This is the third movement of Lightfall, offering. No person is given light for itself alone. The light within becomes most itself when it lightens another. A person who has nourished the light within does not become a sun demanding worship, but a lamp set near the weary, a hearth for the cold, a hand extended to the fallen, a voice that calls the lonely by name. The purpose of inner light is not self-admiration. It is illumination. The words struck him harder than any accusation. How much of his search had been noble? How much had been desperation to be certain? How much had he wanted to answer so that he could finally be free of needing others? The Codex did not condemn him. It simply shone. The fourth movement of Lightfall is communion, when one light strengthens another, and that one strengthens another still, the light ceases to be merely private. It becomes a bond. It becomes a bridge between persons. When bonds are tended, when bridges are built, they become fellowship. When fellowship is faithful, it becomes community. When community chooses the good of the others, not as a burden, but as joy, the light within each person begins to answer the light within all. This is how darkness is resisted, not only by blade, not only by shield, not only by command, but by meaning built together so deeply that despair finds no solitary soul to devour. Light felt the darkness within him recoil, not vanish, recoil. For it had depended upon isolation. He had whispered that his failure was alone, that his grief was the proof of abandonment, that the unanswered prayer meant the absence of meaning. It had turned his longing into accusation and his weariness into shame. But a despair shared before the light was no longer a throne. It was a wound, and wounds could be tended. The hidden section glowed brighter. The fifth movement of Lightfall is the greater good. To nourish the light within and offer it outward is to enter a way of being in which life becomes worthy not because it is free from sorrow, but because sorrow is not permitted to destroy meaning. The best life possible is not life untouched by loss. It is life in which loss is gathered into mercy, courage, friendship, and service. A life worth living is not found by escaping the world's pain. It is built by becoming with others. A reason the pen does not have the final word. The pen never has the final word. Light pulled his head. His beloved daughter came to him then, not as they had been in the Shadowlands, but as they had been in life. Their voice, their laughter, the way their presence had changed the shape of the room. For so long, Light had thought the search for Lightfall began because of her death. But now he understood. It began because of his love, because of meaning, because of light shared, because of bonds made, bridges built. The grave had not been the enemy of the light. It had been the place where meaning, wounded but not extinguished, still burned. The codex turned to its final hidden pages. The glow became softer, more intimate. The Naru spoke truly. Lightfall is the true way of being of the light. It is not a place to be found, though places may shelter it. It is not a title to be worn, though leaders may serve it. It is not a doctrine to be admired, though wisdom may describe it. It is not a weapon to be raised, though courage may defend it. Lightfall is the awakening, nourishment, and offering of the light within, so that others may find, nourish, and offer their own for others. It begins within the person. It becomes visible in meaning, in bonds, in strong bonds. It becomes enduring in community. It becomes tangible in love. It reaches toward the universe whenever one life becomes brighter because another chose to shine. Light could no longer stand apart from the page. He placed both hands upon the codex. The radiance rose around him, not blinding now, but encompassing. It did not erase the room, it revealed it. The shelves, the banners, the tables, the candles, the war maps, the chairs waiting for counsel, all of it appeared in fuller clarity, as though the light has been hidden not by darkness, but by his inability to see the sacredness of what was already within him. The hidden text gave its final charge. In the war of light against shadow, do not mistake the battlefield. The void seeks not only to darken stars, but to convince the soul that its own light is meaningless. It whispers that grief is emptiness, that failure is identity, that loneliness is truth, that hope is childish, that love is weakness, that community is fragile, that the greater good is a lie taught by the naive. Against such darkness, Lightfall stands, not as denial, but as defiance, to face the darkness within and still nourish one's own light, to see the wounded and become a beacon, to gather the lonely and build a home, to strengthen bonds until despair finds no easy prey. It fosters the good and then the greater good, not as abstract law, but as a living brightness passed from hand to hand. This is Lightfall. The words spoken within light faded. Pages remained. Light stood before them in silence. The answer had not arrived as conquest. It had not crowned him with certainty. It had not explained away suffering. It had not told him that every loss had been necessary, nor that every wound had meaning by itself. Instead, it had shown him something harder. Meaning was not to be found, but to be built together. Built from grief that refused to become bitterness. Built from faith that survived unanswered prayers. From tables set for others. Built from chapels where sorrow could kneel. Built from war rooms where protection was planned. Built from books, banners, candles, and hands. From the light within one soul, reaching towards the light within another. Light slowly withdrew his hands from the codex. The glow softened, settling back into the pages like a secret no longer hidden, but entrusted. He looked around the war room. For the first time in many months, he did not feel that he had returned empty-handed. He had returned emptied. There was a difference. One is failure. The other is readiness. Beyond the walls of the keep, night still covered Lordaeron. The stars still kept their distant watch. The world remained wounded. The shadow in Silvermoon had not retreated. Midnight was upon us. War of light against darkness. It would demand more than any single champion could give. But light understood now why that mattered. No single champion was meant to give it alone. He turned from the codex and looked back down the length of the war room, past the leaders' tables, past the chairs waiting to be filled, past the candles burning low but steady. Tomorrow, he would gather them, not to announce that he had solved the mystery as a scholar solves a riddle, not to command as a Highlord, not to claim revelation as possession. He would gather them to share what had been shown. He He would show them that Lightfall Lands were not merely a refuge from the world's darkness. They were a beginning, a place where those who had carried too much alone might learn that the light within them had not died. A place where the weary could be strengthened, the lost could be called by name, the joyful could multiply joy, and the wounded could discover that healing was not always the closing of pain, but the companionship that keeps pain from becoming the whole story. He will tell them that Lightfall was not his. It has never been. It belongs to every person willing to nourish the light within and offer it outward. It belongs to the one who sets the table, to the one who keeps the candle burning, to the one who listens, to the one who laughs after sorrow, to the one who returns after failure, to the one who faces the darkness within and does not bow, to the one who becomes, for another, a reason to endure. Light looked once more upon the codex. Then he knelt, not in despair this time, but in gratitude. And in the quiet of the war room, beneath the banners of Lordaeron's memory and the steady warmth of the candlelight, the seasoned Paladin bowed his head before the hidden truth he had searched the world to find. The light had not fallen from the heavens as a weapon. It had fallen inward, like dawn, entering the heart. And from there, if nourished, if shared, if offered freely to those in need, it could rise again through every bond, every home, every act of mercy, every community built against despair, until even the long shadow of midnight finds itself met, not by one light alone, but by countless lights awakened, strengthened, and shining together.